Welcome to Xenos Connects, a series of educational and thought-provoking webinars that provide contemporary solutions to traditional ERM/ECM problems. My name is Joanne Wald, and I am the Global Marketing Director here at Xenos. Before we start, I would like to take a couple of minutes to cover a few housekeeping issues. Please note that all lines have been muted for this webinar. Questions can be submitted at any time during the webinar by clicking the private chat tab on the left side and then double-click Leaders in Assistance. Questions received will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Xenos has been a major player in the enterprise information management space for over 25 years. Our unique mix of technology and experience has positioned Xenos as an industry leader at the intersection of where structured and unstructured content collide. With a global customer base of over 375 Tier 1 organizations, Xenos' products and solutions can be found deep within the information architectures of many of the world's largest companies. Our solutions are used to improve business processes, reduce operational costs, enhance customer experience, and promote the benefits of green IT. We pride ourselves on our innovation, performance, reliability, and scalability. On February 1st, 2010, Xenos became an Actuate company. Today's session delves into the hidden world of accessibility and is being presented by Peter Ganza, Director of Product Marketing for Xenos. Peter has more than 15 years of experience in the technology industry. Before joining Xenos, he held a leadership position at Ryma Technology Solutions, helping to implement and automate product management best practices. Prior to Ryma, he held a number of strategic product management and technical roles at Symantec Corporation. At Xenos, Peter is the accessibility champion and responsible for the overall direction of product marketing. So thanks in advance for listening. Sit back and relax. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Thanks, Joe, and hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join today. I'm going to try and take a good 20 minutes or so and just provide a good, real overview on some of these topics that we're going to delve into. Just a quick agenda. We'll talk a little bit about, well, what is accessibility, and really a broad topic. So we'll pare that down to what we're discussing today. Look at some statistics and regulation that are driving this in a number of different ways. We'll break this conversation down into really three key topics on digital accessibility, if you will: websites, software, documents. Talk a little bit about what we do, why we're actually here in this space, and then on some of the great associations and tools that are available for you out there in the land of accessibility. So let's get started. What is accessibility? Well, you may be familiar over the last decade or two. We've done a lot of work. A lot of people seem to forget, but we've done a lot of work, great work, on breaching the physical barriers of accessibility. So if you think about things like ramps to get into your office, obviously for someone in a wheelchair. It's also good for the mother who's pushing a stroller with the baby. You think about that button that you have probably on your front door of their office that you're going to push. It's going to miraculously open the door for you. And those are all things that have to deal with accessibility and making things easier for everyone, not just people who are impaired or maybe disabled in some way. So the physical aspects of accessibility, really most of those challenges have been solved. The regulations are there. If you look at building construction as an example, you really can't build anything in North America without meeting a certain level of criteria. So that battle really has been won, more or less. And what we're talking about today is the new frontier, is really all things electronic or all things digital. And that's really what we're going to pare down today and focus on, and specifically when looking at the needs of the visually impaired, because they are one of the largest groups when we look at the communities of people who are actually accessing information online and using various products and services. Now, when you break down accessibility in general, there are generally four main areas of disabilities, really. Visual, of course. We look at total blindness, low vision, color blindness, a host of impairments related to the eyes and to vision. Of course, there's hearing, so people who are deaf who have trouble hearing. A number of cognitive issues when we look at things like disabilities when learning, being easily distracted, having trouble focusing on information, so a whole host of things under cognitive. And lastly, motor, people who can't use a mouse, who have a limited response or a slow response time and just troubles in a general area of doing things with their hands and the eye-hand coordination. So we're going to focus today on visual aspects, but I really just wanted to call out that there are obviously a number of others to look at as well. So let's talk about some statistics on the visually impaired. In North America, there are about 3.3 million registered blind people. That number is forecasted to go beyond 5 million over the next decade. Now keep in mind that this number is people who have actually registered that they are blind. A lot of people that I've spoken to in doing market research have said they don't like being registered, they don't like being called out or being on a list. So the number is probably higher, but that is the statistic for today. About 21 million Americans require large print documents, so they have a significant enough impairment that they cannot read standard text. And you can imagine if you're getting a large print statement, let's say, from your bank, you're probably going to be browsing the web using some kind of a zoom tool to magnify the screen as an example. Here in Canada specifically, the cost of vision loss in 2008 was just over $4 billion, and that's looking at, obviously, a number of issues, specifically having trouble getting employment or keeping that employment, and a lack of productivity in general. For specifically Europe and UK, about 4% of the population have a declared vision-related problem. Again, that number could be higher. There are just under 2 million with partial sight or blindness, again, who have registered, and the forecast today is that will reach almost 4 million by the year 2050. The cost of vision loss was also tracked in the UK for 2008 at about £6.5 million. So just some overall statistics on some of the vision-related items in North America here and in Europe as well. So let's talk a little bit about regulation. This is really one of the number one questions I get from people is, what's the regulation in the States, in Canada, what's the stuff I hear about the UN, the EU? The quick answer to the question is that there is a ton of regulation and a lot of legislation. If we start off with the UN as an example, the United Nations started this ENABLE program many years ago and have really started to encompass all the aspects of the digital universe into a piece of legislation, if you can even call it that countries obviously can sign up to and meet various levels of that criteria. So UN ENABLE is making a lot of noise, and people are looking into that. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA in the U.S. is coming on 20 years old now. And the interesting thing with the ADA, a lot of people find it difficult to understand it, and I'm not surprised, because it's very broad and it's not very specific. I mean, essentially what the ADA has said is that everyone needs to be included in anything that you do, meaning you shouldn't single out anyone. You need to have an inclusionary approach and not segment or discriminate against anybody, regardless of their disability or the impairment that they may have. So it's very broad, and it's not really something that, from a digital perspective, is easy to abide by. Now, with that said, there is actually an update to the ADA going on right now. It's supposed to be done by the end of the year, where they're specifically going to address some of the issues that have come up in understanding how documents, websites, electronic communication all come together within it. So even the ADA is changing quite significantly. When we look at government in the United States, Section 508, which is part of the Rehabilitation Act down in the U.S., is very clear. It goes down into the details for electronic documents, for websites. Any service, product, document that the government is going to build or provide has to meet Section 508 standards in the U.S. And as well, any vendor that does business with the U.S. government or can provide business to the U.S. government has to also abide by Section 508. And it is fairly detailed. It also changes quite a bit. It was recently updated, I think, at the end of last year, and I suspect that will continue to evolve as the technologies grow and change. These are things that are going to be constantly growing and evolving. The Ontarians with Disabilities Act, that's for us folks here locally in Ontario, in Canada. That's sort of a mix between the two if you look at the ADA and Section 508. It's not as broad as the ADA, but not as specific as 508, but it's a real good start, and they have some really good goals, obviously, for making Ontario accessible. If we look at the rest of the world, really, Europe is a good example of just how many different pieces of legislation and regulation are out there. The French, the Germans, the Italians, the Spanish. You can go through any country in mainland Europe, and they each have their own piece of regulation or legislation trying to deal with the issues of accessibility in the electronic world and in the digital universe, essentially. So there's a lot going on with regulation and a lot of modifications, updates, addendums. It's really changing, not day to day, but really year to year. Quite a bit is going on. So let's break the conversation down into those three key areas we talked about. We'll start with websites. Now, websites are really the first place to start, and if we look at what people are doing today, this is where the most of money, essentially, for accessibility initiatives is being spent today. So banks, financial institutions, anybody that provides a website, a service, think about your online banking, that's a product, right? It's a piece of software behind the scenes that's actually driving that. So they've all been spending a lot of time and a lot of money making their websites accessible for everyone, not just the visually impaired. There's also been a lot of activity legally. If we look at the last 2 years as an example, a number of high-profile lawsuits. HSBC would probably be the most recent at the end of last year, of 2009. They had a lawsuit that was brought forward, was settled out of court, and they've agreed to make changes. And most of that had to do with how inaccessible their website service and their information actually was. Target's another great example. Everyone talks about Target. The Target Corporation, the stores down in the U.S. Another simple example of someone as a customer was not able to access the information that they needed on the website. And again, a lawsuit was brought forward. They agreed to make changes and moved on from there. And the interesting thing to note, since we just passed the regulation, is private companies are not yet regulated to do this, but people are being sued and making the changes. Whether it's within the confines of the ADA or not is really a moot point because it is happening. And from a financial service perspective, that's one of the things that obviously we want to avoid from a reputational perspective. So when we look at websites specifically, you'll find the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, which is at w3c.org. This is a U.S. body that has come up with the WCAG criteria. Now, I'm not going to go through all the criteria. It is very detailed. It goes down into every little thing that has to do with the website. The reason I can tell you that is because we've gone through the same ourselves over the last few months, and I've learned all too much about it. But without going into all the specifics, I really just want to call out the broad level themes. And they break it down to this POUR acronym, P-O-U-R. So everything we do on the website has to be perceivable, meaning it needs to be available to the senses, whether that's through a browser or some kind of an assistive technology. They need to be perceivable. They also need to be operable. So if someone cannot use a mouse, cannot use a keyboard, or using some sort of assistive technology, the website needs to work with those technologies. Understandable. This really is looking at making content in a clear and consistent way, not having way too much information on a page to confuse people, with certain ailments, and really eliminating ambiguity if and when possible. And they need to be robust. With all the technologies that are out there, we can't just build things, today, and then something new comes out, it breaks everything, and we have to go back and change everything. So we want to build things, especially websites, in as a robust way as possible to make sure that down the line we can tie into the various technologies that are coming and are going to continue to evolve. So if we're looking at website accessibility, best place to start is the W3C. Their criteria really is the industry standard out there, and it's not something that's going to go away. When we make an accessible website, it's not just a check mark. We're going to continue to improve that accessibility as time goes on. So let's talk a little bit about the software. An actual software product, including potentially one that's served through a website, something that's on demand. They're similar to websites in that they need to follow similar criteria. The WCAG has called out some of that, although not as specific as a website. It is there. Really, what it comes down to in a piece of software is, ease of use. If we make a product easier to use, it's going to be easier to use for everyone, not just because someone's blind and they're using a screen reader, but someone who is not, who is fully sighted and is able to quickly do the things that they need to do in that product in order to achieve the goals that they're looking for. So there's something to be said about the overall principle of just making things easy to use. And you can also look at universal design, universal accessibility. There's a ton of things out there looking at the psychology of how the eye works in the brain, and how much information should be displayed on the screen. And really, what I'm trying to say at the end of the day here is that if we make software easier to use in general, it's in most cases going to help the accessible community. So don't just look at this as something separate. It's not that you have to change your software in order for it to be accessible. It's really that you just need to keep making your software better and easier to use, and in most cases that's going to encompass accessibility as well. Okay, let's talk a little bit about documents. So if we look at document accessibility, this is really one of the funny pieces of accessibility, in that we can do a lot of work to make our website accessible, but if the documents that it serves and that are on our website are not accessible, really, what's the point? We're back to square one. It's easy for me to get to the website, but if I can't pull down the PDF, let's say, and easily access it, you're more or less back to square one. So the WCAG criteria does also apply. There are really a set of broad things required to make a document accessible. You can look at things like defining the read order for someone with a screen reader in a PDF document. They're going to use read order to actually actively go through access information in a relevant way and not be confused by a ton of additional information. We need alternate text. If we look at websites, if we look at links, if we look at pictures that are on a document, someone who's blind can't see those. And so one of the most important things we need to do is build what's called alternate text, so that the screen reader hits a logo, if it hits a piece of trans-promotional information we have on our bank statement, offering the latest mortgage rate or credit card offer, that we can explain what we're showing on that picture to that person with the screen reader user. And there's also a number of other things, looking at language specification. So these devices can often speak in different languages, and it's important to actually define that language for the entire document, or even getting down to an individual field level. So things like read order, language specification, alternate text are all very important pieces of the puzzle, and whether it's a website or a document, it's really the same. Last but certainly not least, we want to talk about usability. Now, while this isn't a technical criteria per se, you're not necessarily going to find much on this in the WCAG criteria other than colors and contrasts. There's an enormous aspect to making a document accessible that has to do with usability and how easy it is to use and how we actually present that information to people in a document. Now here at Xenos, as an example, we're not usability experts, and we recognized early on that we needed help to do this. One of the things we're going to talk about in a moment here is that there are a host of great organizations, companies, and tools out there to help you through this process. One of the examples I like to use is we do a lot of business in financial services, banks, insurance, and so on. And typically what a blind or visually impaired user will be provided is an alternate format document. So they're going to call a special number, speak to a special person, and request a special statement, which, if you go back to the regulation, really goes against the ADA in some ways, but that's a whole other webinar. The challenges there are, obviously, it's a third party. The bank has to deal with. There's a risk avenue. Anytime they have to deal with a third party, an outsourcer, there's the cost component. It's a cost that they cannot pass on to their clients by law. They have to foot the bill for that. And in most cases, it's not the preferred vehicle for people to receive the information. Most of the people I've interviewed in the last few months have all said they would much prefer receiving a document that's properly tagged, that's usable, rather than receiving a Braille statement when in a lot of cases they can't even use Braille. So these are just some of the things we talk about when we look at document accessibility specifically. So what are we doing, and really why is Xenos talking about accessibility? Well, we've recently introduced Xenos Access. And Xenos Access is the first solution to take high-volume print streams and convert those to fully accessible and tagged PDF documents. So we're not talking about individual PDFs, your collateral, your annual report or anything like that. We're talking about high volume transactional outputs. And Xenos as a company originated really in print streams and in taking a number of print streams, doing a lot of wonderful, magical things to them, and driving that forward in a way that's going to add value, whether it's pushing things to online presentment, tying into another system, and really just adding value to that enterprise class platform, generally for statement presentment. So think about your online banking statement as an example. So really, Xenos Access is an extension of our platform, which is known as Enterprise Server. The great thing about the solution is Enterprise Server can sit anywhere you need it to within your infrastructure. We're agnostic. It doesn't matter if you're using FileNet, if you're using Documentum, if you're using AFP, Metacode. We're totally agnostic to the print streams, to the ECM tools that you're actually using, and built it in a non-intrusive way. So we're not going to go and displace anything, replace an existing investment. We're going to look at the existing infrastructure you have today and how you actually build and present these statements, and we're going to plug Enterprise Server into the appropriate spot, pull in the data we need from the print stream or from the PDF that's generated, do our process to it, and then throw it back out to the next stage of the process. Whether we're doing the presentment or not doesn't matter. As I said, it's completely agnostic and very non-intrusive. And the other thing is, it's the first time that this has been done. As far as we're aware, nobody's taken the time, and we spent about 2 years on this, to build this in such a way that we can take those statements and those repeatable documents, tag them appropriately, and then drive them through the next phase of the process. So a lot more information on the website, as you can see there below. We've got some downloads, demos, and all kinds of good stuff as well. So let's talk a little bit about some of the associations that are available. Now, one of the things we learned early on, we're not experts. 8 months ago, I didn't really know anything about accessibility. So, I took it upon myself to learn as much as I could, but we recognized we needed help, and from an association perspective, there are a ton of great associations, mostly nonprofits. In the U.S., the AFB, the American Foundation for the Blind, is one of the most active. The CNIB here in Canada, the RNIB over in the UK. And these are all organizations that their main purpose in life is to assist the visually impaired community, through products, through services, through awareness, lobbying with the government, dealing with the lawsuits. And I talked a little bit about earlier about HSBC's lawsuit. They had to sit down with the AFB to actually go through and figure out what they're going to do in order to address their website accessibility. So really what I'm trying to say here is don't be shy. These organizations are here to help you, as well as a host of others. If you're specifically looking at document accessibility, there are a number of companies here and in the States that provide document accessibility services, or DAS. So feel free to do some searches on that, or drop me a line, and I'll let you know a few as well. So there is places you can get help, and they've got a lot of great resources on their sites as well. So we've got a blog. This is actually my personal blog outside the company. As a technology company, we were not that well versed in accessibility, and one of the things that I wanted to do was really tell our story so that other technology companies can really learn from us, from the trials and tribulations. It's not simple, but it can be done. It's not something that is a checkbox. Accessibility, frankly, is never going to go away. And I'll be the first to say we're by no means done. We've made a number of significant changes to our website. We're continuing to do so. We're making our collateral accessible, updating our policies and procedures as need be. So it's an ongoing process. We've done a lot, and we're looking forward to doing quite a bit more. And the blog is just a good place to read that story, again, outside the company. There's no advertising or anything like that. Learn about what we've been through, and we've also got a good blog roll going there on some of the key blogs in the space that also speak to these needs out there. And just to get close to the finish here, social media, specifically Twitter, is a fabulous avenue. I remember the first few weeks I started getting into this, I would just start posting questions to Twitter, and you would get a ton of responses. The visually impaired community, there's been a lot of research that's been done. Everyone will tell you that they are one of the most proliferant online groups out there. and they are one of the most loyal. So if they find a product or a service that they like, they're going to continue to use it. And Twitter is a great example. There are two key accessibility hashtags. The first is accessibility. The second is A11Y. Now, a lot of people ask me, what the heck is A11Y? Well, if you count the letters in accessibility, there are 11 letters between the A and the Y. So it's just a short form for Twitter, and we try to keep our characters down to stay within the limits. So accessibility and A11Y are your two Twitter tags. We are also on Twitter as Xenos_group from the company perspective. And then you've got my personal Twitter as well on all issues related to accessibility at pganza. And I think at this point, I'll thank everyone for their time, for joining. We're definitely open for questions. I'll throw it back over to Joe to see if we have any, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Peter. As you mentioned, we will now answer your questions, so please submit them by using the private chat tab in the lower left corner and submitting to Leaders and Assistants. Okay, so our first question. How does Xenos Access work operationally, and what is different than what I'm doing today?
That's a great question. I talked a little bit about this earlier. Maybe I'll just expand upon it. Really, we're going to fit into wherever makes the most sense. We're not going to force you to go one way or another, and that's one of the things we spent a lot of time on. We didn't want to pigeonhole people into, you have to use our system to do all these wonderful things. So essentially what we're going to do is, first thing we're going to do is look at your infrastructure, how you're doing your statement presentment, what you're doing with your print streams. Is Enterprise Server in there already? If it's not, we're going to find the best place to do it. And the great thing is we don't have to displace anything. We're completely non-intrusive. We're going to take what we need from wherever it happens to be, whether it's in FileNet, in Documentum, in a certain print stream, do what we need to do to it, and then throw it on to the next piece of the puzzle. So really, operationally, you're going to be adding one step. Where that step is really dependent on your specifics, and obviously we'll be able to tell you that pretty quickly.
Okay, so the next question. When you talk about Section 508, ADA, what is that relevant, or how is that relevant to what you do?
That's another great question. One of the things that really we're looking to provide as part of the solution is Section 508 compliance for documents. ADA, not so much. It's really fairly broad. It's not something you can easily comply to electronically, at least not yet. But it is something that we are working towards, because really what we're saying is we're going with the ADA in saying that we're making things inclusionary. If you're doing PDF statements today, why not make them all accessible? You don't need to have people segmented out or discriminated against almost, looking at the ADA. And from a 508 perspective, that's one of our markets. We're going to be going after government fairly heavily, and Section 508 compliant statements is really what we're going to be providing. Okay,
one more here. How long does it take to implement?
That's another great question. It really depends on the infrastructure, on what we need to do. There's obviously a software component to this. So we've got Enterprise Server as our platform that we are going to throw in and install where it makes sense. And then there is a services component to this as well. So we're going to need to go in, spend a little bit of time to actually build the templates in a way that makes sense to run through our process. So how long? I can't give you a specific number. You could be looking at weeks potentially, to get things set up, to build the templates, and to move things forward. Now, I just got a question, and I'll go ahead and take this one if you folks don't mind. The question is, our print streams contain multiple PDF pages per statement per client. Can Access be able to separate statement pages per each client? I think the answer to that one is yes. I'm actually going to follow up to make sure. We'll double check with our product managers. But we can deal with multiple PDF pages per statement per client. That is not an issue. I think really what would happen in that case is we'd have to look at how you're actually doing that today in order to find the best way to do it. But there's no reason that we can't handle that type of input. And by the way, I just got another note that the answer says yes, we can definitely split pages out. So my long-winded answer, the answer is yes.
Great.
Any other questions?
Okay. Thanks. And it looks like we've pretty much taken up our time. So just want to let everybody know that this webinar has been recorded. It will be posted to the Xenos website in our library. All the webinars from the Xenos Connect series are available on demand, so if you missed one, please feel free to download it from the library. For information regarding future webinars, please follow us on Twitter at Xenos_group or visit the events section of our website, www.actuate.com/Xenos. Thanks everybody, and we hope you enjoyed today's webinar. Take care.